It's our privilege and honor to have Johnny O'Brien here. But before we allow him to speak, back in the early 2000s, my brother and I wrote a play about Milton Hershey. It sold out the Whitaker Center for 3 years and the Fulton Opera House in Lancaster. We couldn't get it to Hershey until Johnny O'Brien and the Alumni Association championed the play and brought it here in 2003. Thank you very much. A former alumnus, Nick Leitner, who recently passed, he was a class of 44. I went to visit him over at the Masonic Homes. He held up Johnny's book and he said, "This is it. You've got to read this." So with anything else to say or do, I'm honored and privileged to welcome a real champion of the Milton Hershey School, Johnny O'Brien.
Thank you, Brian. I was just going to project, but then the crowd got bigger. I better use this, huh? Yeah. Wow. Thank you for being here, especially since most of you know all the answers already. And some of you, I know more than I do about the school and the community, so it's humbling, the collective knowledge that's here. I'm going to want to try to respond to what's on your mind and heart. So I'll go on from a series of questions. Susan was kind enough to do a little survey, and so I do know what some of you are wanting to hear about. And I'll cover some of those, and I want to save some time toward the end where I can see what's on your mind. And I want to speak mostly from my own experience, and rather than all the things that I've learned or read about and heard about. And that would be two different decades, roughly. When I was a student here from 1947 to 1961, and so unfortunately I just missed Mr. Hershey. And I look back on that, and it's a sad thing for me to say I was that close and missed meeting the person who's behind this all, this magic. And the other period I'll discuss is when I had the incredible honor of coming back to head the school, roughly from early 2000s, around 02 to 09. So beginning with when I arrived with my brother Frankie, who, if you've read my book, you know his story was very different to mine. He didn't make it through the school for reasons that have all been improved and changed by Milton Hershey School for our kids. But it was a rough and tumble time back then. But the big events, the pivotal events were roughly around 1950, the school and Mr. John Hershey changed the name of the school from what to what? Hershey Industrial. Yes, a big change from HIS, Hershey Industrial School, to Milton Hershey School, because the industrial name had all kinds of connotations that weren't very kind or supportive of our children. And so that was a really major change for us. Shortly thereafter, about the same time, the school ended the practice of indenturing. Who knows what indenturing is? Yes?
Well, working under some administrative mechanism.
You're signed over to that we, in fact, our parents, if we had any, or relatives, had to sign us over to the school legally. And we were now under their control. And a lot of it was to, in fact, in my indenturing statement, which I have from 1947, it says that parents or relatives will stay completely out of anything relative to the children one, just as I was getting close to graduation, was when we finally got electric milkers. They were automatic milkers, and if you'll see it in my book, but if you just followed the school's history, you will know that the dairy farms, the dairy farm model, drove everything about the school. It drove the schedule. It would be when we could go to school, when we could come home, when we could have sports, if we could have vacation. We couldn't have much because we needed all of the older children. But the worst thing about it, looking back, at least for me, was it required so many of us young kids that we needed to include the junior high students. So when I was 10 and when we were 10, we went out to the farms and were mixed in with some of the crazy 19-year-olds that had come from the cities and were pretty rough and tumble. And it was a tough time. So that was the beginning of when Milton Hershey School could break the school into 3 divisions. And now they had a middle school division, and those kids, aged 9 to 14 or so on, would have their own homes, which with a much more supportive and protective environment. Now, there were some other big things, not when I was there, but between the time I graduated and came back, that you probably all know about. But the first was the admission of non-white, of children of color, back in, I think, about 68. And then a little bit later, another important one, and they're going to have to quiz somebody in the back row for this one. What was the one? I think it's around 76, Chris. 77, thank you. What was it? Girls. The guys went crazy, and the girls put them in their place. And Chris was our first female graduate from the school. In case people don't know you, would you stand, Chris? Because you are a star. And so fast forward almost 40 years, I was very active alumnus during that time. But lo and behold, around 2001, something crazy started to happen, something very disturbing. And that was that the school was beginning to be taken off of its mission of serving the neediest and most alone children. And so that better kids were being recruited. They were being put into almost all academic and college prep programs, and the emphasis was on getting these better kids with fewer rules, less work ethic, and all that. Went to college. Well, when us home guys and home girls got wind of that, we started major protests. And how many can remember us protesting in the square and stuff out there? And that's tough for home guys to do. We were taught to do what we were told to do and never challenge authority. So for us, you knew that something had to be seriously wrong for us to do that. But the problem was we didn't have legal standing. The alumni didn't have legal standing with the Attorney General or the Orphans Court. And so we couldn't make the progress we wanted in having the reform and having some of the senior leaders and board removed. But then something even more exciting happens. Who can guess? Yeah. So this board, full of itself, decided it was going to sell the Hershey Company. How many people remember that and were here for that? Well, you may remember, maybe not the details, but you may remember once the derail the sale and the community protest joined with the Milton Hershey School alumni protest, then the Attorney General and the Orphans Court took notice. And within a very short period of time, both of those offices said it's time to clean house. And so they let the president go. I'm not into pointing fingers, so I won't even use names, but because he's a good person. He's a good man. He just took the school in the wrong direction. And most of the board was let go. And so we completely had a fresh start. I and the alumni were just delirious, excited about getting the school back on the mission. Out of the blue, I get a call down in Maryland at my office. I was running a company for 30 years that taught and coached executives, mostly of Fortune 500 companies, how to create high-performing teams, mostly how to get them to play more nicely in the sandbox. Because if you remember back in the 70s, it was a command and control environment. You did what the boss said. No, it's not the best way to get the most from your people. And so anyway, I'm down there and they call me and they say, would you be interested? No, they put it another way. They say, Johnny, you wouldn't be interested in coming up to Hershey, would you? I said, well, to do what? And he said, well, to be the interim head. And I said, well, yeah, I'd be very interested. And they said, well, yeah, but you got your business and we need someone soon. And so you probably wouldn't be interested. So no, I was guessing they weren't very interested in me. So that was the feeling I was getting. But I said, yeah, I'll be up there next week. School's off course, and children, therefore, off course and even being hurt. So I'll be up there, and I did. So it was pretty easy to figure out what to do. First of all, we had to get the school back on its mission, which most importantly means taking the neediest and most alone kids that we can find. Right? And even bringing more of them. So we expanded the school and we brought the kids who needed us the most. And then we went back to basics, to our values, things like Mr. Hershey had the golden rule and the 10 Commandments. It's all he ever had, religious-wise, anywhere. And he had those in each of the student homes. And then we worked with our staff and our house parents, faculty, kids too, and we built a set of sacred values of how we were going to behave together. And between that and our school pledge, we got back to the basic fundamentals of what being a good person and being a good young person was all about. My second decision there was to hire someone who would be in charge of the chore program and to buy, I think it was maybe 94 lawnmowers, rider mowers, so our darn kids would actually start mowing their own lawns again. So we had gone from milking cows every day of our lives. I milked 2,214, I figured it out. And to get them off the couch, even to do their own chores. And so we focused on the basics, and one of the most important things was obvious to me, should have been obvious to everyone, I think, is that if you're going to prepare kids to be successful after graduation in Milton Hershey in an institutional setting, then you better create their ability to have some independence, the ability to think for themselves. And up until the time I even returned, our kids pretty much were supervised every minute of every day. And were pretty much instructed on what to do and how to behave right up to the time they walked across the stage at graduation. And then we're told, good luck. Don't get them, guys, right? And what do you suppose happened? Our failure rate was enormous. These were good kids. They were hard-working kids. Because now we've gotten the work ethic back, the principle. But to think that we weren't allowing our kids to start learning created an independent living program called Transitional Living. And it's made a world of difference. And then we made a commitment to follow our kids on into college and see how they were doing and require them to communicate and go out and visit them. Because if you think about it, Hershey School invests, and it's probably more today, in my day, it was $100,000 a year per student, per child. So if you're even there for 7, 8 years, and then go on to college, which we pay for entirely, that's $1 million investment. And we all know that when you make a really huge investment in something, you expect what? Return. And we weren't getting it, and it wasn't that we needed to brag about our graduates, but we wanted to help make sure that they were successful. And we made tremendous strides in doing that. Now, I know I've left some things out, but, I should say, I'll do just a couple of promises and a couple of threats. Greatest promise by far, I think, is the new Catherine Hershey School, CHS. How many of you have heard about it? If you haven't, make sure you look it up and go check it out, because by far in the history of the school, deciding to commit to a program where we would go outside the campus walls was the biggest risk, financial, legal, in the entire school's history, because I don't know if you thought about it, but because we have the fortune of having such deep pockets, we are exposed to lawsuits at any time. And so staying within the campus walls, which we did for the first, 110 years or whatever, and making sure that our program was tight and everything was done just right, was a safe way to go, but it neglected the fact that we had another 10 or 15 billion dollars that we weren't using to help poor and needy kids. And so that was an enormous decision and risk, and I thank Pete Gert, President Gert, and the board for doing that. They now have 3 centers up, the 4th one on its way. It's well underway. And the other real plus, I think, is that now that President Gert has had 12 years, this is his 12th year, there's a stability there, which is really important to the school, which we didn't have for a very long time. On the threat side, and it will always be this, number one, is our governance system. You know, that we have a board of managers, it's called, our board, that good people, I think they've always been good people, but because they're not accountable to anyone, right? And they have all the power and all the control, and not accountable to anyone, they tend to stray off. That's why we got off course and off mission with the board that thought that they knew better what to do with our kids than Mr. Hershey did. That's also that by the time of the end of my tenure, around 2009, the new restructure board, right, the reform board, they were all for the mission, and I appreciate that, because that's the most important thing. But also by that time, they were beginning to double and triple and quadruple their income, because they get to decide at that point how much a salary they made. And so it ranged from $150,000, I think, when I started, to where the chairman was making over $500,000 and well over $1 million when they also combined their board service with the Hershey Foods Company. That's still a challenge, but it's better. I'm here to report a couple of things. One is that as much as we lobbied to have our president on the board, like any organization will have its chief executive on the board. Why? Because they know more about the place than anybody, right? But they now have said, and I think it's happening soon, that President Gert will be on the expenditures. But also, they're being held by this Attorney General, at least, to a salary limitation, where they can only get cost of living increases. They can't just go in and say, oh, let's double or triple our pay here. And they're abiding to their term limits as well, so that's good. The biggest problem, and I don't know how you get around it, is that a lot of the people that come on the board, they're really looking to get on the Hershey Foods Board, which pays an enormous amount. It's a 7-year term, so you're gonna make a couple million maybe, something like that. And the way to get there is to get to the Milton Hershey School Board, so that's still a problem to be fixed. But mostly upside, mostly promise. Still difficult to recruit students, especially after COVID, but we're doing it. Still difficult to recruit house parents and sometimes teachers, although I hear that the teachers' strike has been solved. But let me stop there and see what's on your mind and in your heart. Questions? Way back, yeah.
I often hear that the retention rate is difficult. Is that something that's realistic, or is that just an imaginary thing?
Well, no, it's real, and you can imagine how difficult it is to keep children long enough when they first arrive, when they beg their parents, it's usually often a grandmother or an aunt or someone, to take them out if they don't like it, or what if I give it a month and I don't like it, or I'm homesick. And I mean, that's happened from 1909 when the school started. And so it's difficult. And then when COVID came along, it became much tougher. But they are bringing that number down, at least from what I hear. But that's real, and it's important because you can invest, let's say, only $500,000 in a student that he leaves. Now, they get close to senior year and the free college, they're more likely to stay. And it's important for us to have our children at least 5, 6 more years, because the difference the research showed when kids started at Milton Hershey, especially as a lifer, and I'm a lifer, I came in pre-kindergarten, but when they come early on, at least in grade school, and we can work on their character in depth, right? How you treat people, how you believe in yourself, all of those good things, and we have a much better chance. So there will always be that kind of attrition, right? Who else? Yes.
I would like to tell a success story
Yes.
in my life.
Yes.
The Rasmussen brothers, 5 of them.
Say again, I missed it.
Rasmussen
Okay.
brothers,
Rasmussen.
5 of them. The oldest one, John, they all went to Milton Hershey. The oldest one became president of a hospital. That was, let me see, I have to think of names. Anyway, then there were twins, Holger and Howard, and they both became doctors. Holger was my brother-in-law. And then there was Norman, who became the nuclear physicist at MIT. And the baby, David, they always said he was the youngest and the least, because he was an officer in the Air Force.
And
They all went,
that's remarkable and yet not unusual.
and they all graduated from Gettysburg College.
Wow. That's something. 5 brothers that all had enormously and are having enormous enormously successful careers. And I'll give you another example just to offset it, because it clearly isn't about going to college, and that's why a lot of us got pretty upset when the former head of school was taking us mostly into a college prep direction. Because my best friend, Dick Purcell, does anybody know who Dick here is? Okay. I think he was as successful as any Milton Hershey School graduate, and he was just a machinist, just a machine. He was a machinist, and when I was there, 80%, 75% of our graduates were in the vocational shops. And you know, employers lined up every spring up at Old Senior Hall to hire our kids because they knew they were so well educated. They had this incredible work ethic, and they had nowhere to go. Combination for an employer. But Dick started his little machine shop here in his garage in Hershey, built it out a little bit, then he built a bigger machine shop, had I think roughly 30 employees, and then he built his engineering and machine shop over here, and I don't know how many, but 100, and he had quite a few engineers working for him. And that tells the range of your story, ma'am, and Dick Purcell. That range is where our graduates were throughout all that. Yes, there were some other, yes.
I'm relatively new to the area, and it's fascinating what you just said, but somebody told me that the school lost direction when the person who was president wasn't an alumni. Is there a law that says, or a rule that says that, you know, walk the walk, talk the talk kind of stuff, that the president has to be an alumni? Because it seems to be doing much better when that's the lineup.
Yeah, I think a lot of us grads would hope there'd be a law, but there isn't. But hopefully there's common sense if you look at the pattern. And maybe you can in one particular stage find a really good alumnus, but I think you probably always could. And if you look at how unique and different Milton Hershey is, it's not that you couldn't find a manager, it's probably that you couldn't find a leader that would appreciate it. And that's what happened last time when we got off track, is they thought they could take it a whole different direction,
Yes.
and that would be okay. Now, there will always be home guys and girls out here that won't let that happen. And hopefully the community, like you did last time, when we joined together. Yes.
You're referring to when they wanted to sell to Kraft, who wanted to buy Brick? What happened there?
And '02, the Hershey Company, really the board, which had the Hershey CEO on it, of course, decided it was time to sell, a good time to sell.
To who?
Well, I think Wrigley gave them the biggest bid. They looked at a number of companies, and they got very close. But if it wasn't for the community that derailed the sale, we already had lit the fuse and thrown some bombs. I don't think we could have undone it in time. Yeah. And it had the positive effect of ridding that whole executive group and the board from the school as well. Yes. Yes.
Hey, John.
Yes, please.
I worked for Milton Hershey School in '67 when I graduated from high school, and I always admired the kids. So a lot of the times it would be up in the hay mound.
Yeah.
And we'd bring the hay in from the field, put it on the elevator,
Yeah.
and they'd be up stacking.
We did it. I remember now, we left the part out. First we'd bale it out in the field, and when those bales, and I don't know what they weighed, I think it was 200 pounds, and maybe it was on the game, because the hay was still even a little wet, and you had to grab them and put them in the back of the wagon and stack them in a way that wouldn't fall off while the tractor and the wagon was still running.
No machines then.
Yeah, very.
Milton Hershey had what was known as hay dryers. Do you remember those?
I do.
There was one right there where the Giant Center is.
Yep.
So the hay would come in off the field. I always said Milton Hershey farmed with money, not for money. Because they had a lot of nice equipment and it was well maintained. But we used to have to bring the bales in to that hay dryer,
Yes.
till them, and then they run a oil-fired furnace,
Yep.
which would dry the hay so that when you would put it in the barn, you wouldn't suffer the spontaneous combustion of the nice farm. But the Dairy Township Municipal Building was a dairy farm. I reported to Section 9, which was a farm over by the Penn State Rehab.
Yeah, if you were lucky, your farm's hay would get dried, but they couldn't do it all, right? So a lot of times it was wet and heavy, and when they would shoot up those escalators, elevators, thank you. These heavy, we were up in the hay mow, up high, in the barn, and that's when often some bullying would get done, where some older kids, not nice, I mean, most of our guys were terrific, but a nice one, sometimes not so. And they would throw in these hay bales on the younger kids who obviously couldn't handle them, and that was wild. But all in all, taking kids off the street back then, putting them in an institution, and throwing 10-year-olds and 19-year-olds together. And by the way, this is why I'm opposed to the dairy farm and why we didn't figure that out earlier. Because if you have dairy farms, then who are you going to need for house parents? Farmers. You're going to need herdsmen, dairymen. And there were some good house parents who were dairymen, but there were some really bad ones because they needed to find dairymen, and whether they knew anything about kids or cared about them, wasn't it the first priority? And so now our ability to find really good house parents, and you can't find 100%. It's the most important operational role on campus. When the door closes on the student home, it's that house father, that house mother. They're going to do what they're going to do. And so finding the very best people is important, and we've been pretty fortunate that way. Yes.
What is the role of Hershey Trust in all this?
What is the role of Hershey Trust? I didn't have a lot of involvement with them myself, but as you know, the Hershey Trust both is the keeper of our money, of our endowments, but they also oversee the Hershey Entertainment and Resorts. At least they did. I think they still probably do. And so everything from the park and the arena and the gardens and all of that is with them. And there was a special, I know the townspeople say it wasn't a large enough amount of money left by Mr. Hershey to fund some of that. But we've gotten to a point, and this happened just before I left, that we said, how about we stop putting all this pressure on Hershey Entertainment and Resorts to try to make a profit, because they could some years not, and maybe do more for the town and the school. That doesn't mean still be good at your business and let's not waste money. But let's make the first priority taking care of the community and the school. And I hope that's paying off. See? Yes.
You had said at the beginning, when it began, that the parents signed off for the grandmother or whatever. Yeah. Does that mean they couldn't have any association with that?
No, you could have association, you could come visit. And some who were close enough would even come occasionally on a weekend, maybe have a Saturday privilege. My brother Frankie and I mean, they were far away and my relatives are really poor. We never had a visit until like 9th or 10th grade. Now we sat outside on the little stoop, with our little suitcase, hoping they would come, but they never did. And that was not uncommon.
changed then?
All of that has changed. And again, it's a combination of things. One is the dairy. As soon as we're able to even get electric milkers, we didn't need as many students to milk, and then we could begin to allow students to go on vacation. And I think before I left, we got about 2 weeks. Does that sound right, John? Oh, you got 4. Whoa, we only got 2. They can expand.
He had steers.
Yes, in the back there.
I was wondering about disciplinary,
Yes.
problems which I'm sure arose, but how were they handled?
Yeah, disciplinary problems, how were they handled? Well, there was a lot of disciplinary problems. So the thing was called detention, and sometimes there were demerits that you build up that led to detention. If you had good house parents, and even then with the dairy farms, there were some good house parents, they always worked with you and cut you a break, right? But if you had bad house parents, like I did, because someone asked me the question on that survey, why am I so bitter toward house parents? I'm not. In fact, my house parents from K to 5, when I was in grade school, were just absolutely wonderful, and they probably saved my life. But when I was out at the dairy farm, I didn't draw some good ones. Now, if they weren't so good, you couldn't look at them the wrong way. And you would get, 2 weeks of detention for insubordination for looking at them the wrong way. So it depended on, luck of the draw there, but the most important thing to us was what we call getting over the wall. Was that just somehow get the heck out of that student farm home. And the best way to do that was the Friday night movie privilege, right? Friday night privilege. And we'd get our 25 or 50 cents allowance, but you had to behave. If you were on any kind of detention, you'd miss your Friday night privilege, and you wouldn't be able to go to the park on those days, so you wouldn't get out, and you'd usually get serious chores. So on the weekends, I can't tell you how many times I had to whitewash that barn, even when it was as white as could be.
I have another one. The Catherine Hershey School, I've, read in the news and heard different things. What are the particulars of that? Because I kind of forget. Is that for very young children?
Yes, it is. It's really pure early childhood learning, and it starts theoretically from not K, from birth to, I guess, what? 5, okay. And we start picking up kids 5 and 6, right, for the most part. So I think we had some at the Hershey Center. I think we had some of our first kids who were babies. Is that right? Does anybody know that for sure? I think it's true.
It's true.
Yeah. So yeah, about as young as can possibly be. And think about the quality of that experience they have all day while their parents can work. What a phenomenal thing. Way in the back.
What do the students have to work, or do they have to work, and what kind of, you mentioned lawn mowing, but what kind of jobs do they have now with their farm?
Well, I'm not too current with that. They've always pretty much had to help with preparing the meals and doing the dishes and doing cleaning at the house. And maybe that's a little bit of a challenge now with 10 or 12 kids. It wasn't a big challenge for us, but we had the cows to milk and the crops to breed and so on. So does anybody know maybe a little more current? Is there new stuff?
We've been to a couple group homes. My daughter works for the school, and I cannot think of the name of the house. She claims they're the best. Morales? Sam Morales, I think it is. But anyway, when you come there for like Thanksgiving meal or a Christmas meal, kids take your jackets. How are you tonight, sir? And the kids are just fantastic. They keep them. They have them in control. They do do the wash, they help with the wash, they help with the bowling, they help with the dishes. I like to do dishes. I always want to help do dishes. And no, the kids will take care of it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, so, and think about the ability to do that well now when you have 10 kids and they're in an age range of, say, 3 or 4 years, right? As opposed to having 25 or at my grade school home, we had 32 kids. Right?
Oh,
One couple,
oh,
32 kids, we had a couple of spinsters, they call her. We were single that helped out from time to time. But now we can do it well. We can do that well. Here we go.
Talk a little bit about how you excelled in football while you're watching Frankie not excel so much. That was hard for you, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if I was going to make. He's asking about how I excelled in sports, particularly football, when my brother Frankie wasn't doing so well. Well, Frankie left when I was in 7th grade. I think I have the right season, 9th or 10th. And when he left, and I knew he wasn't coming back, he was my roommate, the two of us in a bedroom, and I just cried for weeks. And you weren't allowed to cry about Hershey. There was an oath, sacred oath. You couldn't cry. Let's see, you couldn't tell your sorry story because everyone has one and they all stink or something. And there was another one. Oh, you couldn't rat out on your homeboy friends. But I did cry for a while, and something right around during that year, just clicked in my brain, and I don't know why. And I said, somehow, for Frankie's sake, I'm going to make it here, and I'm going to be someone. I'm going to be worthy. I'm going to matter. And so all I did was try to be the best student in every class, trying to be the best athlete, a leader. It was really not healthy. And I see Beth, who's a psychologist back there, she would probably tell me it wasn't healthy to become that obsessed. But that's just what happened. And I thought the more I achieved, the more I'd be cared about. And it wasn't true. We all find that out eventually, right? Now I got more notice, for sure. You know, because I was an all-state quarterback, and I was president of class, and I was salutatorian or whatever. And so you get recognition, but a lot of it, when you're an orphan child, that's hollow. You know, it's not like I got a hug. So yeah, that helps you out. Yes.
I'm curious, do you still carry some of the learned behaviors as a student? For example, I cannot clean a floor unless I'm on my hands and knees. There's no law. I fold my clothes, and my wife's clothes the same way. When we first bought our house and we did it, she didn't understand why I was wearing her underpants the same way I fold mine.
Yeah. So everybody hearing that, yeah, you carry a lot of those deeply ingrained behaviors. Now, I'm not quite as ill as you. At least not at my age, anyway. But so many things having to do with work ethic. When I get up, it's never after 6, right? There's never anything left out on the counters or anywhere in the house. And my wife is very thankful for that. I didn't know there were any guys around who picked everything up. And of course we did. We weren't allowed to have anything showing anywhere. So, yeah, but I think the big ones for me was the work ethic and the love of my classmates. Those two things. We still get together and always will until we drop. You know, that's what counted. I will say something, because a couple of the questions that came in on the survey had to do with what I think about the relationship of the the school and the town gown kind of relationship. And I have to say that when I was at the school, there was none. There was zero. I mean, I was fortunate to have teachers called the Bigleys. They both passed, they both taught, who lived in town, and they opened up their house to me and anybody who ran away from the school. They kept their back door unlocked, but that was rare. 99% of my classmates never stepped foot in a house in the town. It has gotten better. So one of the first things I did too early on when I came back was to start some programs called, the biggest one I think was called Project Fellowship, and I believe it's still running today. And I know they've done more now with internships with the company and HE&R and so on. So our kids are getting into the community more, but it's not close to what it could be. I think back upon it, I played football against Buzz Cash and a guy named Luzon, I think. I don't know if any of these names ring a bell. Kenny Snyder, and so on. And how wonderful would it have been if I got to know them other than trying to run over them? You know, as people, you know, if we got to know them because they could teach us so much about life. And I mean, when I left Milton Hershey School, I was the most naive 18-year-old, we all were at that time, had barely been exposed to girls. I'd say 80% of my classmates had never touched a girl by the time they graduated. Oh, except for senior prom when they got a renegade. So they bring them in on buses, and some of our guys would scatter. But the point being that it'd be so good for our kids, especially our older kids, to connect with the community in all different kinds of ways. I did go to after our mandatory church for the whole school. I always went to a second, they called it second church, and I checked, I think there were about 9 of them at the time. I checked all 9 out to see which one had the prettiest congregation. It was the Presbyterian church at that time. That's where I went. Yes.
Don, one more thing, my daughter has invited kids over to our house for, different meals and stuff, and I know the one time we had a pair of African-American sisters from North Dakota, and they found out about the school through an uncle that lived in Philly. Has there been somebody from every state at the school, do you know?
Yeah, I'm sure there's been someone at the school from every state. Most every year. Now the great majority are Pennsylvania, and then the Mid-Atlantic region right here, and then other parts of the country, more here on the east. But it covers just about every state.
Do they advertise throughout the United States?
They do, and they do more now because it's more difficult. In fact, following the admission of non-whites, children of color, and then girls, you would think that we would have no problem filling the school with enrollment, because now we have girls and now we have students of color, right? But a year or two after that, they changed the rule that you had to be a real orphan. And so started admitting and still do what we call social orphan, where you have to have very few people. You have to have low income for sure, but very few adults in your life, but you don't have to technically be an orphan. Yes.
I retired from teaching in Lebanon, and at one point I had an 8th grade girl whose mother passed away. Her father, I don't think, was ever in her life, and I thought, and she was bright, and I thought this would be so great for her to come
it would be so helpful, that they would be close. It wouldn't be like she would be totally cut off and miles away. But it was so hard for her losing her mother that she could not accept or even try to apply at Milton Hershey School. It just was too overwhelming.
Description of you say 8th grader and lost her mother, and was just so distressed that she couldn't even make the effort. Well, that's typical of our kids coming in. Gosh, it's hard, and we have gotten pretty good at knowing how to do that. How to help kids make the transition. In our time, they just threw us to the older guys, and they put us in line, and we said, okay, we're not going anywhere. Yeah, it really is difficult. Yes.
When you said you can't rat out your fellow students, could you rat out a bad house parent? Would you have someone to go to?
Whew, no, you'd be dead. Seriously, going to the authorities, the officials, or something about, you would have to have pictures or something or whatever. I mean, you just couldn't do it. No. I'm trying to picture it. Today you could, but it would still be hard, I think. Well, especially you have to stay with them in many cases. I mean, if it doesn't work, then what? Now, you probably can get a transfer, perhaps, whatever. But since I'm not there today, I don't want to speak as an expert on that.
You said recruitment was low. What is the criteria? Who makes the decision on who gets in?
We have an admissions office. I should probably give this question to Beth Shaw in the back there. Handle it because she pretty much ran our admissions for a long time. Correct me here. I'll give it a shot. To come to the school, you have to be between the ages of 4 and 14. Is that right? 16. Well, okay.
I'm 16.
Okay, so I wouldn't, when I was there, I wouldn't want to take many 16-year-olds. It's too little amount of time to reform their character. So okay, 4 and 16. You have to meet our low income standards, and they're pretty clear. And then you have to have fairly few adults in your life, and that's a subjective one. Beth, do you want to address that one? She's retired, so she's gonna beg off. Okay. I'm close, aren't I? Okay. There's another one. Yes.
How does the school handle things like cell phones and the fact that kids are coming from all different cultures and urban and rural places? And where do they draw the line as far as tattoos or body piercings? Who makes those decisions?
Yeah, that's another question that's current. Cell phones were just arriving when I departed in '09, so it wasn't an issue for us. We wouldn't have let a tattoo near the campus. So, but now I think they maybe can if they cover them up and so on. There's other people in the audience who know the answer to that one too. If anybody wants to.
Well, I was just visiting a student home less than a week ago, and the cell phones are really dependent on the house parents.
Okay.
Some house parents have a rule where cell phones need to be locked up each night. They get turned in before going to bed. Other house parents are a lot more free and loose about it.
Okay.
So, maybe you get some cool house parents that let you have unfettered access to screens.
That makes sense. Makes sense that if the house parent, they know their kids, they know the environment. Mike?
Yeah, it's only for senior division kids, so you have to be medically crossed ready to have a cell phone, and you have to be able to run it yourself.
So there's a lot of group plans.
only high school. You gotta park it before you sit down in the classroom. Yeah.
Well, there was a follow-up there too about students with different cultural backgrounds. So that's also definitely a challenge. I think the school definitely has an emphasis on sort of raising cultural competencies among the folks who interact with students, but it definitely is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
I was there and there were two students that didn't eat pork for various reasons. There was another student who is a vegetarian, and we were working very closely to make sure that we had something suitable for them to eat that evening. And this was pretty much the first week those kiddos were there. So they pretty much take it as it comes, and they try to be as open-minded about it as they can be. And I definitely think that there's been a cultural shift in the direction of being more culturally accepting of students from different kinds of backgrounds.
Yes. Does everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. And think too, when you add into the religious differences and on. And in our day, it wouldn't matter. I mean, but we couldn't take into account individual needs very much. We had one psychologist, Beth, I think she was half-time, and you would be ridiculed out of the school building if you were seen near her office. Now, Beth, I gotta ask you this question. So how many staff did you have before you just retired? You can,
There's probably about 15 psychologists and maybe 18 full-time and part-time behavior support specialists.
15 psychologists and 15, 18 behavioral specialists. And we need every one of them. More, probably, right, Beth? Okay, who wants to ask a question? Are we winding up? Enrollment again, there's no maximum. When I was there, it was 1,100, and we took it to 1,850 in 5 years. So we were admitting close to 600 or 700 new students a year into this place, into this culture. I don't know how we did it, but we said we were going to do it. We needed to. We knew we needed to serve more children. I think it's probably, is it up to 2,000? Right? It's 2,200 right now. Okay. I don't think they would, from what I hear, wouldn't go beyond 24. At least not for now. You started to run into limitations. But with the addition, think of this, with the addition of Catherine Hershey schools, early learning, we already, I think, have, what, about 450 more kids we're serving, and when they're done, we'll have 2,000, 10 centers times a couple hundred kids. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, wow.
Is that like a fast track into the school too? Is that automatic once you get to 5?
Well, the program's only a couple years old, 2, 3 years old, and so I don't think we know yet, do we? Anybody know that we have anybody coming from there, into the school?
Yeah, one enrolled Monday.
Okay.
There were a couple last year. The hope is that those kids won't need Milton Hershey School because they're supporting the whole family at the Catherine Hershey schools with employment opportunities, job training skills,
Yeah.
nutrition, parenting. But then some kids are enrolling and more were.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it wasn't set up for that purpose, even though it will make enrollment easier, and the kids who come will know the Milton Hershey way. And so it will help a lot in that respect.
The challenges recruiting house parents or students are both equal, right? Or is it even a problem recruiting anyone?
Well, it's always going to be difficult recruiting house parents. I think it'll always be difficult finding and enrolling the neediest, most alone kids. And I think that's one reason my predecessor got off track. It was easier to start expanding the criteria for them. So it's both of those. Because house parenting is really difficult. Even with just 10 kids, it's difficult. And
Well, being a house parent, it's a lifestyle commitment.
yes,
You're working and you're living with these students. You're working for 12 days in a row. You get 2 days off. You maybe get a couple of weeks off throughout the year. You're fully dedicated to working with the students, and it encompasses your whole life.
yes,
And there aren't a lot of people out there, especially folks that have their own grown families, that are able to make that type of commitment. And it's extremely challenging to find the right kind of candidates that are able to embrace that. And that's kind of the crucial element of what the school is. Without house parents, we don't have the Milton Hershey School. It's so crucial to the functioning of what Mr. Hershey's vision was for the students that he wanted to serve there.
yeah.
So it's an ongoing process here of finding the right kind of people that are able to really sort of integrate that into their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. The total lifestyle commitment, and you think about how difficult it is, even with, as I say, with 10 children. Because when I came back, early on, I asked house parents how many of them would like to come and maybe also teach for us or coach for us. Because when I was here, we had what was called triple hitters. We had house parents who taught and coached. And I thought, well, that makes sense. But today, the challenge for the house parents is so much bigger and more difficult because we are trying to meet the needs of the individual child, and that wasn't the case before. Yes.
And I'm a house parent's daughter.
House parent's daughter, listen up.
It was difficult handing my parents over to all those kids. They weren't really my parents anymore. They belong to all of us now. Were you when I started 8th grade? Your parents became up here. This is really when we came in. We missed you. But a lot of people you mentioned, I remember Milt and a lot of other people. Dr. Mr. Alexander, all, other people.
Yeah, add that to the list, the challenge. Here's someone who had to be living in a student home as a house parent's child.
Especially a girl, because they weren't taking girls at first. Only a few.
Okay, and if they were all boys, even more so.
So, and then here we are, girls, I suddenly have a brother, a father, and 15 other brothers. I had to be dressed from here to the floor. We had, our first place was Venice, and we had all the ponies from the park. That was wonderful for me. But boy, was my rear end was really sore. So here I
And
am,
ponies.
not knowing a whole lot about these kids. I was only there a short time at that home. And I'm looking in the mirror, at my rear end in the mirror, nothing on it. And I look out and the boys are all looking at me.
Oh, you made their day, and you made their year.
Please don't talk about that, by the way.
It was fun, but it was hard.
Any other questions? Because I don't want to hold you. John, are you still engaged with Milton Hershey in any way?
I am engaged. I have this great privilege of working with Senator Alexander, who's the executive director of the Catherine Hershey Schools. And as I tell him, and well, he knows it, I don't have to tell him, I tell Pete, President Gert, that Senate has the hardest, most difficult, bruising job in the entire school. Much tougher than Pete's, much tougher than the president's. And it's because trying to build something from scratch that we never tried to do, we don't know how to do it. We want to do it really well, and by the way, they want you to do it really fast. That combination is a killer, and it's amazing how well he and Okay, I'll take 3 more, because again, I don't know what time is it?
You're fine.
Oh, my God, okay, we're good. Well, no, 10. What, they did change it?
6 is the trial, $350 million, six schools.
Well, I heard 10. Beth, you have a weigh in on that, 6 or 10? I always thought it was 10. Okay. You're right.
Within central Pennsylvania.
What?
I mean, 6 within
Within the surrounding counties, so they have one now, and they have one in Harrisburg, in Middletown, they're doing one in Lancaster,
2 in Lancaster.
2 in Lancaster.
And 1 in Danville.
one in Danville, but they want to spread out, but you understand that the smart thing was to stay local, because there's so much unknown, and there's so much trouble we can get into legally and otherwise. To keep it close and do it right, and do it well, but I'd be very shocked if we don't spread beyond that,
You gotta be awfully careful, quality.
you know? Yes.
Yeah, that's actually something that really occurred to me the other day as I was thinking about the Catherine Hershey. I know that they're definitely really doing their homework here on where their integrated needs and how they can utilize these resources for the most sort of community-based sort of way of trying to work on producing the desired outcome here, which would be empowering an entire family to not even necessarily need to utilize a resource like the Milton Hershey School. But there is a potential here that moving into the future, moving into a decade from now, 2 decades from now, if this program is successful and it continues to grow, I mean, there's a very big chance that it's going to surpass the Milton Hershey School in the volume of pupils that it is potentially serving. And this isn't necessarily a bad problem to have, but it's definitely something that is kind of scary, just knowing the history of how the school has been evolving over time and this kind of trial and error that we've sort of gone through. But are we really thinking about what this kind of future is going to hold here? The entire
Pretty sure, the point being that the early childhood learning program, the Catherine Hershey, could grow, mushroom-like, and that I don't think we would allow that to happen, because to do it well, especially if we begin to move out the western part of the state and so on, how well can you manage that from a distance? You starting to get many little Milton Hersheys that would run their own, and it's really hard to run a school like this and do it safely for their health and for legal reasons and so many reasons. So I think it'll contain itself would be my guess. You were wanting to ask a question, I think. Somebody here. No, somebody here. Yes. Yes, sir.
John, can you recall how many penalties you got on the football team for being on the field yelling at the refs?
You must be talking about when I came back to be head. Well, I would get sometimes, rarely would I get displeasure, but one time we were playing this big Philadelphia school. I think maybe Bob or our AD said I could maybe give the check to the officials, and they said it'd be way too much like a bribe, but I love competition. I love our kids to learn from competition, being in the heat of the fire and having to do the investment, the prep work to become, whether it's a good athlete or a good singer or a good actress, any of those things. So I spent way too much time, my time, in those days being out at practice, out at rehearsals, and so on. For that reason, but I would tend to get carried away at games because I've always been very judgmental about refs, and I've always had this incredible need to be right. And my wife would say, right about everything. She'd say, but so I would get out of control. I don't know the number of penalties, but I was warned a lot. Yes, way in the back.
What did you do with your business?
couple of senior, junior partners, but becoming senior, and I sold it off to them. You know, because I said I'd be up there next week, and so I was. Yes.
Someone mentioned about, do you have difficulty with graffiti or tattooing at the school?
Yeah. Mike, do we have trouble with graffiti and
Yeah, not
tattoo?
graffiti, I know they have loosened the rules a little bit on the thing, but through COVID, I think things loosened up a little bit. You used to be able, you could pick a Milton Hershey kid out, if they're walking through town, or you'd see them anywhere, because they were always appropriately dressed and well groomed. I think they look more like the general population now.
I just have to say something, because we did look alike.
Yeah.
We dressed exactly alike, and so when we would get our town privilege on Friday evening, we go in, and the Hershey kids, who were grouped around their teen canteen or whatever, they had something there for their dancing and whatever, they would start to make fun of us, which was a big mistake. They called us cows, because we still smelled. You can never get that manure. Really, seriously. You can milk cows twice a day for years. You'll never, I don't care how many showers you take, so.
But you know what? The tattooing and the graffiti,
Yeah.
I'm talking of personal experience. She knows it. There was never any in the United States until after World War II. The soldiers found them in the jungles and so on. And how do I know? Because I was in high school all through World War II.
Yeah, well, I think we have
There
that
was
pretty
never-
much
you
under
never
control.
saw a car or anything, or a railroad car, never, anything.
Here in the back.
I was in the last class at work in Barnes, and it was bittersweet when we lost our house.
What year would that have been?
93, 92, 93. And I was wondering, was there ever any regret about taking away the dairy program, or was there any talk of bringing it back after it had gone away?
I think there was enormous regret on the part of alumni, home guys, partly because we were forced to experience it. What I should say, kind of thing, but we also knew the deep work ethic that it created, and also a service mentality. I never thought about this when I was here. We were almost every minute of the day, we were in service to our farm home, service to our barn. We were in service to the sports, to, representing our school in sports or music and whatever. And we developed a service ethic without actually having it. Yeah, the biggest controversy that I know around that, and I kidded Bill Fisher about it. President Fisher was the one to make that decision, that, well, why not bring in sheep or ponies or something so you keep the work ethic without letting the dairy cows drive the calendar of the school. That's not gonna happen. Yeah.
Wasn't there a problem too when the girls came in, because they didn't know whether they were gonna have the girls milk the cows?
Yeah, I'm gonna call on Chris for that. Chris, hey, Chris, please stand up, Chris. You gotta refute that. Yeah.
I said we milk cows. Not to be treated differently.
Yeah, that was very important, to not treat them differently.
Hay fever and different problems.
Yeah. Okay, what else? We're gonna try to think of one other story. Yes.
Can you speak about the transition when, because it was after you were a student, with the minority students coming in?
Yeah, can't speak much to it because I wasn't here at that time. When I would come back to visit the school, and even before that, I knew theoretically or realistically that it was going to be a great thing, you know, to have students of color and to have girls, especially because one of the things, and Chris back there knows this too, as soon as the girls arrived, the boys had to shape up in a number of ways, maybe just being, you know, a little more gentlemanly, but also because the girls outperformed them academically by far. And a lot of our girls, I think, Chris, are smart enough to say, don't be hitting on me and stuff if you don't get A's in your classes. Yeah.
I'll try to answer that question. About a dozen years ago, I'm a grateful graduate of
Also, John Hannawalt, the current alumnus of the year, which is the most magnificent.
Thank you. That's not why I took the microphone. I'm a 1970 graduate, which was the last, quote, all-white graduating class they admitted. Minority students in 1968 after the Girard Trust was broken down in Philadelphia, and Milton Hershey had a plan in place, Milton Hershey School, to request the court approval to admit minority students, and began admitting immediately after that trust was broken. About a dozen years ago, I led a panel discussion for the Historical Society with some of those first graduates and some of the teachers. John Cook, who was a basketball coach and director of religious education. Mrs. Elby, who was, I believe, the first minority employee who helped integrate the school and the programs and the cultural requirements that were needed. And some of those students, some of those first students that graduated in 1971, and it might be recorded somewhere in the Historical Society records, and some of those students talked about how difficult it was for them as the first Black students to enroll. My perception as a graduating senior was these are just more kids. We got some better athletes that started to participate in our programs, and I was unaware, but I was not a Black student. So for me, it was, and I also did not have any Blacks at my student home, but I relied on Marshall Nixon as a very talented basketball player to join our team and participate. So he was welcome, and Clayton Wilson and a few others that I still remember by name. So I think many of the Black students would tell you it was a very difficult transition for them. They came into an all-white place. I think most of the white students just said, hey, they're just kids, and we try to learn from them too.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Well said. Yeah. No question, it made us better. And if we're about serving the neediest and most alone kids, I mean, we're missing like two-thirds of the world's population, of the country's population, by not serving girls and students of color. So it's one of the best things we ever did. Yes.
Mrs. Elby's son was in our unit as an honor.
She's a remarkable lady.
She was always there.
And her daughter is the president of the Harrisburg City Council.
She was little. She was in the little kids. Big family.
So, we'll wrap it up here. Okay, one last one.
One more
We'll get
thing.
to five.
Recently, a friend of mine, his name is Paul Schaefer. He's 101 years old, and he's a Milton Hershey grad. He lived at Vian, which is located on 743. He got together with a good buddy of his, who I believe is 102, and lived at the Dearden House. I was not at the conversation, but I would love to have been there. I know Paul told me that when he lived at the farm in Diane, I just took for granted he milked the cows. He said, no, my main job was to feed the mules.
Wow.
And care for the mules.
Yeah.
And he got staying power out of that. That sounds yeah. I'll just wrap up two things. One is, I didn't mention that when I came back, especially based on the experience of losing my brother the way I did, we made just an enormous emphasis on eliminating bullying across the campus of any kind. And you throw 2,000 children together like that from all these different places and really difficult backgrounds, you're gonna get some of that. But we created a number of programs. One of our best awards was based on that, and I had a policy that more than anything else, if a kid does something wrong, if it's related to bullying, I want to see him that day in my office. And it's just incredible when we got the whole community, to put their arms around that I don't know, you probably can't ever eliminate that with that many kids, but we went a really long way. The other thing I'll just end with is to encourage the town and the gal, the community and the school, to find ways to get together, whether it's just being more informed, whether it's being in this project fellowship, whether it's finding a way to visit a kid at a student home. I know both sides are receptive to that, but I can't tell you how much good that would do, because as much good as we're doing at Milton Hershey, we're still an institution. You can't take that part out of it. Growing up in an institution is not like growing up in a family or anywhere else. And I know they're bad families, but anything that can be done to make it more personal, more like life or family is great. So I encourage that. Thanks for listening to me, and especially the experts that are out there. Oh, yeah, thanks. Just, is this still on? Yeah. I brought a few books of my story, semi-sweet, and the title might make more sense to you now as you hear me talk. Wasn't all sweet, but it saved my life and it gave me a great one. So I have a few books back there if somebody wants them. Thank you.
Very good.